Hello, everyone. I'm Harry Harding. I'm a university professor and professor of public policy at the University of Virginia.
Hi, I'm Shirley Lin, and I'm a visiting professor at the Miller Center. I also teach in the politics department.
And in case you're wondering, we are married to each other. And we're speaking to you from the subject of tonight's expert chat. I say tonight because we're in Taiwan, so we may be 12 hours ahead of those of you who are back on the East Coast of the United States. We want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Let me introduce the topic first, or the project that we're working on, and then we'll get really started with the substance. This will be a very informal discussion of a research project that's still in progress. It's a project that the two of us are working on together with some colleagues here in Taiwan that was commissioned by the de facto American Embassy in Taiwan. The American Institute in Taiwan is its name, and the Taiwan government. And as you saw, the topic of the project is the internationalization of higher education. I'll introduce the problem that this policy is trying to address. Shirley will then identify some of the historical and structural factors that have created and exacerbated the problem. And then together we'll analyze some of the issues that the policies have encountered. Our basic conclusion, as you'll see, is that the internationalization of higher education is a goal that everyone nominally supports. Taiwanese say that they want their country to play a larger role on the international stage. They know as a major trading economy, it is necessary for Taiwan's continued economic successes as well. They know that the internationalization of education, including higher education, is an important part of that broader process. But our project has also shown that while Taiwanese accept the goal, when it comes to the specific policies that are designed to achieve it, then the opposition begins to emerge from a wide range of stakeholders who believe that their interests will be negatively affected, or simply that the benefits will be limited or elusive. In other words, many Taiwanese say, it's a great idea, something that's really necessary for our society, as long as someone else does most of the work or bears most of the burden. So let me begin with a little bit about the basic problem in Taiwan as I see it. And it's what I call the Taiwanese paradox. Taiwan, as I'll explain in a little bit more detail in a second, is a very wealthy and progressive society with a diverse population. It's deeply integrated into some key aspects of the international economy. But despite all of that, it's not particularly internationalized yet. And to understand that, I like to talk about what I call the Taiwan paradox. And that is, as I say, a society that is in some ways very much internationalized as far as the economy is concerned, but a society that is still primarily local. In what ways is Taiwan a very highly globalized economy? Most importantly, it's producing a vitally important product that is much in the news these days. It produces the most advanced semiconductors in the world, many of which are produced by Taiwan's flagship foundry, TSMC, or the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. Shirley has worked in this industry in the past, and she can tell you far more than I can. But let's just say that with regard to producing leading edge semiconductor at the necessary levels of quality is fiendishly difficult. Very few foundries can do it, and basically few, if any, can operate at a level that competes with TSMC in terms of producing the most sophisticated leading edge chips in the world. Now, there are other chip makers that produce what some call legacy chips, less sophisticated chips for more normal day-to-day, but still significant purposes. But even there, it's surprisingly difficult to produce them at high enough quality. And Taiwan is basically at the leading edge of all of these forms of semiconductor production. Many of you may have read about that in the news recently. But of course, Taiwan's links with the international economy go beyond semiconductors. For one thing, it's an increasingly popular tourist destination, receiving a record number of visitors, 1.1 million visitors in the single month of December 2019. despite a Chinese decision to greatly restrict the flow of tourists from that country, who had previously been the major source of tourists coming to Taiwan. Tourists come to Taiwan for many reasons. They're attracted by spectacular scenery, hiking and biking trails around the island, surfing on its eastern coast, great food, a museum with the best collection of traditional Chinese art in the world, the treasures from the Imperial Palace that moved to Taiwan in the late 1940s. And beyond that, Taiwan is a very creative society with an increasing international impact, creative in dance, in film, in music, in visual arts. It's also a very progressive society. Not only is it what some describe as the first Chinese democracy in the world, but it's also the first society in Asia to have elected a female president who did not come from a well-established political family, but simply from a normal middle-class background in the capital of Taipei. Taiwan is the first country in Asia to legalize gay marriage. It hosts an annual gay pride parade that brings thousands of members of the LGBTQ community to Taiwan from around the world. It has appointed Asia's first, and possibly the world's first, transgender cabinet member. And as most of you know, it's really been in the headlines recently because it's been a real success story in combating the pandemic, with only 10 deaths for a population that is approaching 24 million people, in part because of its successful program of digitizing government services so as to compile and integrate many pieces of relevant data on the pandemic, from where masks are available, to the immigration records of those entering the country, to the incidence and spread of the disease. However, except for a few neighborhoods in the capital, including the one that we're speaking to you from, Tianmu, located in the hills above Taipei, Taiwan remains largely local, even parochial in outlook. As I said, it's diverse, but it's diverse without being really international. For example, it's state of the art. Really, we have a lovely public transportation system here. The system announces bus stops and subway stations in 5 different languages. That sounds pretty impressive, but only one of those languages, English, is a foreign language. The other 4 are natively spoken languages. 3 Chinese dialects, Mandarin, Hokkien, and Hakka, and Aboriginal Taiwanese. English is actually not widely spoken on Taiwan. And that's one reason why Taiwan punches below its weight on the international stage. So basically what the government has done is to announce 2 major policy initiatives to make Taiwan more international. First, to make Taiwan a bilingual country in both Mandarin Chinese and English by 2030, and internationalize the higher education system by attracting more foreign students and faculty, and by encouraging Taiwanese students to study global issues and study and travel abroad. But why is this proving difficult? That's the policy problem we want to discuss with you today. And lest this seem all very remote from you back home, let me remind you that this is a problem that the University of Virginia has shared with Taiwan. Every strategic plan at UVA since I came to the university in 2009 has set globalization of the university as a high priority. The curriculum has been largely centered on the United States so far. The number of students studying abroad is far from where we would want it to be. And some say that the curriculum in many programs and departments simply remains too narrow and not sufficiently global. So obviously Taiwan's problems are distinctive, but they're not necessarily unique. And Taiwan's experiments and experience in trying to globalize its higher education as part of internationalizing the entire society bear comparisons for us to consider and may provide some valuable lessons for the United States and even for UVA as well. Now I'm going to turn things to structural issues that explain why Taiwan is where it is.
Thank you, Harry. I like to now dig deeper into the historical and structural issues which make Taiwan find the challenge of internationalization of higher education so much more perhaps than other countries. First of all, Taiwan has not been part of the international community for more than 3 decades. 30 years ago, Taiwan democratized, and it has shown that a Chinese democracy can govern effectively, and a high-income economy can continue to grow even as the world suffers from a severe pandemic. But since Beijing replaced Taiwan as the capital of China on the international stage, Taiwan no longer has jobs. For those of you who are at studying public policy at the Batten School or elsewhere, for diplomats, students of international affairs, basically there are very few opportunities because Taiwan does not belong to most international organizations which require statehood. All this puts Taiwan in a very grim position. Even though it has become a wealthy society and escaped the middle income trap that has plagued emerging economies all over the world, and its system is democratized, it is falling into a high income trap characterized by demographic decline, greater inequality, and greater growing polarization. With lower fertility, improved longevity, the island's population started declining in 2020, and Taiwan will see its workforce reduced by half to only 8.6 million people around 2065. The situation is worsened by quantitative easing, adopted worldwide to address first the global financial crisis and now the pandemic, which fueled housing prices especially. And according to Taiwan Central Bank, household debt as a percentage of GDP has reached nearly 87% in 2019, much higher than the global average. While older generations are asset rich, younger people are relying on debt or simply relying on their family. Therefore, you can imagine, it is not every person's goal to study abroad and to learn English and to be more cosmopolitan simply for the sake of it. Getting a job, contributing to one's family, or saving towards eventually having your own family has become priority. Taiwan has to overcome several structural issues, but one of the deep-rooted problems is an education system which appears unable to develop an adequate pool of talent to meet market needs and solve contemporary policy issues. The need to identify and address problems in Taiwan's education, including traditional way of learning, an integrated system of testing for assessment, an uncompetitive compensation system for teachers and professors who are very poorly paid. This is all urgently needed. Perhaps most importantly, the system is insufficiently international, as measured by the extent of the use of English. Of course, we must remember learning English is not equal to internationalization. And this is something that we'll come back to in the Q&A if the audience is interested. Taiwanese students and scholars are often sent abroad and return to Taiwan, and foreign students and faculty are encouraged to live and work in Taiwan to broaden perspectives and encourage innovation. But without appropriate reforms, it's very hard for foreign students who come to study in Taiwan, like some of you have done at UVA, to stay here and obtain residency. Taiwan also needs to attract more high quality faculty members in order to produce a more international workforce. Despite its recognition to be a place, especially today, compared to China, that has full academic freedom and excellent faculty in technology, public policy, and Chinese language instruction, Taiwan cannot realize its potential as an English language higher education center unless these problems I just discussed are solved. So promoting greater fluency and enhancing internationalization of Taiwan's higher education have been identified as major priorities for President Tsai Ing-wen's administration, and she is in her second term. Taiwan is searching for solutions not only to its high income trap, to address the problem of the decline of its middle class, and China, of course, is the most obvious answer, but also China poses the biggest threat to Taiwan's existence. With COVID-19 effectively contained and economic activity are still uninterrupted, Taiwan's economy may be growing, but foreign scholars are not coming in, foreign students are unable to travel, And also Taiwanese students are unable to go out. As you probably know, Taiwan does not have vaccines, unlike Singapore or Hong Kong, its neighbors. And so while it is very safe, people are not likely to travel very soon. Despite best efforts to diversify Taiwan away from China, trade flow really is heavily dependent on China. China is a natural trade and investment partner because of its common language with Taiwanese, culture, proximity, attraction of its market. Trade with Taiwan keeps growing, and last year during the pandemic, trade with China actually reached the highest point in 40 years since economic relations between Taiwan and China resumed. And even though foreign students interested in studying Chinese may be more interested in coming to Taiwan, there are still great opportunities for most students to go to China to study, and also for Taiwanese to go find work and study in China. The next 2 points I want to raise are very important, but I won't go into it in detail. First is, like most East Asian economies, societies, the immigration policy does not welcome foreign students and professionals for long-term stays or residency, and not, of course, not to mention naturalization. The second point is that, like South Korea and Japan, of course, Taiwan was not ever an Anglo-Saxon colony, and therefore there is no English-based education system. And unlike Singapore and Hong Kong, where bilingualism is the norm. For Taiwan, the use of English is problematically low. And I will leave the policy challenges here, but our main conclusion is that these policies, which meant to promote internationalization, of course, that Harry has mentioned, they have been poorly designed. The policy of making Taiwan bilingual by 2030, most believe is unfeasible. It is not low-hanging fruit. Some of the English-taught international programs aimed at both foreign and Taiwanese students suffer from poorly coordinated curricula, offering simply what English-speaking faculty are willing to teach. Programs to attract foreign faculty, demanding that they spend a lot of time in Taiwan, also are not easy to implement, because most senior tenure foreign faculty are meant to spend most of the time in their home institutions. I'm going to now turn it back to Harry to discuss the larger problem of the lack of critical mass and the lack of a supportive ecosystem.
Right. But before we do that, whoop, did I
yes.
turn something off by mistake?
Yes.
Uh-oh, hold on.
It's all right.
Okay.
Before we do that, let's do a poll.
Yes,
Really?
that's what I was going to say. We have a few questions for you to answer. You'll be able to do it on your screen. The first question, if you could put it up, please, is basically asking what brings you here today to join us? What is it about this expert chat that attracted your attention? You're busy people, and we'd love to know why you're here. So can we post the first poll, please?
Hello.
Is the poll posted?
The poll is posted.
Okay, very good, because we can't see it. Is that normal?
Yes, we have just 30 more seconds.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, very good. And so we're just going to ask you two questions for now. We may have a couple more later. But the first question, as I said, is why were you here? I think I turned off one of the. Yes.
Oh, here. Okay. Oh.
Oh my goodness, a very even split. That's fascinating.
Wonderful. Next.
Next question was basically,
Oh.
have any of you been to Taiwan? How many of you have actually been here? I think that's the next question.
Yeah, here it is. Wonderful.
We're really,
Right here.
yeah.
Wow.
really quite surprised I'm glad we did this. This is really saying that our audience, at least, is pretty internationalized, which is terrific. We may ask later about what you think about UVA's level of globalization.
Okay, next.
But not now.
Yes, no, we're going on to the next question.
You want the third one now?
Yes.
Okay. We are going to do this one now. Okay.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you very much. It's wonderful that a quarter, well, I would say half of the audience who know enough about UVA think that UVA is actually adequately.
Yeah, completely adequate.
Completely
Right.
adequate.
I know a lot of effort has been put into it. So the relevant officials, starting with our so-called UVA Global Office, headed by Ambassador Steve Maul, will be happy about that.
Who's in the
Who's
audience?
on the call? Do you want to ask the last question
Yes,
about
please.
what is missing?
The last one, please. Teaching and learning, content of the curriculum. Well, thank you. That's
Right. So far, it is not largely in a sense, a people problem of not having enough foreign students or faculty, but it's more the content of the curriculum and the priority placed on teaching and learning overall at the university.
excellent.
Very
I think
good.
that's really excellent for us to get a sense of who's online.
And we want to thank Millie for letting us know that this was possible to do. I don't think we've ever done it in one of our presentations before. So thanks for that. And let's talk about some of the bigger problems here. I think that those of us who are interested in policy know that basically any specific policy problem is actually embedded in a much larger environment. There are many moving parts, many interconnected variables. And so in a sense, you can't really address one in most cases without addressing them all, or at least a larger number of them. And that certainly is true here in Taiwan. What we have found is that there is not a particularly conducive internationalized ecosystem to encourage anyone, especially students, to learn English or to become international in other ways. There are only few civil society organizations whose working language is in English. The exams are basically of English language are basically written exams They show your ability to read, maybe to write, but mainly to read. And very little attention is paid to spoken English. There is no English language television station here. Of course, there's access to cable television that people are willing to pay for it. There is now, we're happy to say, an hour-long English language news program. So that represents a very recent improvement. But there is not a particularly conducive environment. Very, very few corporations, including multinational corporations who operate here, operate entirely in English. So as a result, what happens is that English and globalization become the equivalent of an elective course. It's not something that is required. Students are not really required in very many places to become proficient in English. They're encouraged to, they may be asked to, but they're not required to. And I think that this is related then to another broader problem, which is related to it and reinforces it. And that is that there is not a critical mass of people to create that more internationalized ecosystem. There are not enough English language teachers. There are not enough faculty in universities who are willing to teach in English. There are not enough parents who believe that it's really fundamentally important for their students to become proficient in English and to set their eyes on an international environment. Not enough young people for many of the international constraints that Shirley mentioned. Not enough of them believe that they really have the opportunity to use English and to become truly global citizens. So it's a kind of a series of vicious cycles. There's an ecosystem and infrastructure that does not support the internationalization process, and there are not enough people who are already globalized to staff and to support that system. So we come back to the original problem that I mentioned, and that is that basically everyone gives lip service to this goal, but there are not really enough active support to make the goal particularly feasible at this point. One specific example, there's a real problem in the universities. So many of the faculty here in Taiwan are very capable scholars, trained in the United States or in English-speaking universities, especially in the United Kingdom or Australia. But many of them are very reluctant to actually teach in English. And they have many reasons that they give for being reluctant, that their English isn't proficient enough, that it would simply take additional time and effort for which they would not be adequately reimbursed or incentivized, that too many of the students that they would be teaching would be foreign students, not enough would be Taiwanese students, and so forth. And so this illustrates the idea of the absence of a critical mass to support an internationalized infrastructure that we've concluded is the sine qua non for making this work. Anything you want to add before we go to Q&A?
No, I think we missed the successes. I like to add, I think what is very important is when we think about internationalization, oftentimes you'll think about, for Taiwan, of course, that also meant more than 30 years ago, students going to the United States or to the UK. But today, internationalization, of course, in Taiwan means actually having talent circulation among countries that are high growth, with students who would like to come to Taiwan to study, and where Taiwanese can go learn in order to find jobs. And that actually in many ways point to Southeast Asia. So we'd like to talk about, we have done a bit of field work already in interviewing programs that are successful. And we have found that in both programs, as well as in terms of individual students, what worked really well is to aim at Southeast Asian students. Geographically, this makes sense, but also Taiwan as an advanced democracy has a lot that other Southeast Asian students from democracies could learn from in terms of governance, as well as technology vocational training opportunities. Now, this is partly subsidized by individual governments and the Taiwan government, but Also a smaller number of other countries that have diplomatic relations with Taiwan also send students to Taiwan. And a lot of graduate programs actually in vocational schools need more Southeast Asian students because of declining population, especially in science and engineering. The small number of international colleges whose courses are taught entirely in English are more of a mixed picture, except for those in the STEM disciplines. There are several flagship programs to attract foreign faculty to Taiwan, and we have discussed that that has not reached a critical mass and has been somewhat poorly designed because of the low numbers in the past. There are a lot of short-term opportunities, but very few foreign faculty members would come here for extended number of years. Our project, therefore, has two major conclusions, and conclusions that will be tested and refined at the next stage of our research, which will involve convening dozens of focus groups of various stakeholders, foreign students, Taiwanese students. We have already met with many Fulbright scholars here, and also alumni of foreign universities, parents, faculty, members, visiting faculty, government leaders, whom we just visited today, and perhaps other are basically going to tell us what is the goal of these different groups of individuals. And not only do the specific policies to promote internationalization need to be rethought and better designed, as the portrait of this issue as a problem leads to our discussion of what kind of leadership is needed. But also various stakeholders need to be persuaded that this is a goal that they will need to fulfill and support as citizens, as students, as parents, as teachers. Too many Taiwanese see globalization as an optional project, not an essential one that sounds great, but really doesn't impact them. If you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a civil servant, English is not that important. I would say that the best comparison probably is with Japan and South Korea to understand, except that Taiwan is much smaller and has a smaller domestic market. And so jobs that require trade and investment skills really does require a more cosmopolitan and international outlook and skill set. Many Taiwanese see a global curriculum as a set of elective courses, not really all that important. And this, to change everyone's thinking, requires transformational leadership, not so much at the societal level, but at the individual level. Globalization is not a goal that can be achieved only at the societal level. It cannot be just top down. It requires the buy-in and support of many individuals, and Taiwan collectively depends on becoming more international in order to reach the next stage of success as a high-income democracy. So at this point, we'd be eager to get your thoughts, feedback, and questions. Oh, I see there's a lot.
Good.
Okay, first one. Maybe I'll take the first question. Can industries play a role? For example, can TSMC create internships in industry? That's a really good question. Actually, it's one of these questions that actually is an opportunity and a threat. The opportunity, of course, as Harry explained, is Taiwan now is known as both a hotspot internationally, and second also as a place where chips are made, the most advanced chips. Is that good or bad? It can be a huge opportunity, but it may not be sustainable, and it could become a threat, as China now wants to catch up and will catch up eventually on making legacy chips. But in terms of the most advanced chips, what the United States government would like to do is to onshore foundries, and therefore TSMC has already agreed to go to Arizona and invest to help create a foundry in the United States. So eventually the opportunity will be more difficult to sustain in terms of the edge. But what can TSMC do? In fact, this is a good question. There are many TSMC and the government are already investing hugely in creating programs and opportunities. But in fact, this is a concern for many educators that a lot of resources are going to STEM and to, of course, the foundry hardware in general sector, and neglecting other sectors. For example, schools of public policy. And this lopsidedness actually has led to, of course, most students who are able to study engineering and go work at TSMC may choose to do so, but eventually on a long-term basis, is that the right thing for the society? This is something that is separate from simply doubling down on an industry that is, for the time being, the star, the future, if you will.
Mhm.
Is there anything to add?
Nope.
Okay.
Let's take some more.
And
Let
let's
you
look
read
at the
them, find some good ones and read them. 'cause
This
I
one
can't
is
see
on
it.
UVA.
Okay. And what does it say?
Are there small feasible changes that UVA could realistically make to better support global programming?
Well, I think there are several things. Right now, one of the areas that we've been disappointed in so far has been the relatively low number of students who actually study abroad. Now, obviously, study abroad is very difficult, if not impossible, during the pandemic. But as the situation improves, it'll be interesting to see whether the study abroad programs are laggards or leaders in the recovery process. Some of the problems, interesting, at least reportedly, are that students like being on ground so much that they want to spend as much time at UVA as possible, particularly in the junior year. That's the traditional study abroad time, when so many are very active in various student clubs and associations, waiting for leadership positions during their senior year. That's all understandable. So one thing the university is doing is trying to find other times in the four-year academic schedule where students can study abroad. In the second year is often seen as being a relatively good prospect there. And of course, many of you may have heard of the so-called, there's a London first, a Shanghai first, I'm not sure how many other cities and universities there are now, where students will spend the first semester of the first year studying abroad, to get them used to that idea, give them that overseas and global experience at a time when they're not already sucked into activities on grounds. We'll want to see whether they then integrate well when they finally do come to grounds, or whether they've kind of missed the chance to get involved in activities, in organizations, or even to make friendships. So it's very much a work in progress. But that's one way of UVA is trying to identify the problem and solving it. It's more expensive to study abroad in many cases. Simply the airfare is an additional cost. Not everything can be done by a mutual tuition waiver. Not everything can be assumed to be cheaper when it's done abroad than when it's done back at UVA. So I think that there will be lots of different attempts to increase this. On the sort of on-grounds curricular side, I think that basically we do have some quite strong regional studies programs. The problem at the master's level, where many students do want to do their regional studies work, is that, at least in Asian studies, which I know the best, there simply is not enough faculty to teach enough graduate level courses to really make the master's program as attractive as it might be. That's one reason why we're trying to have a partnership with an English language program here in Taiwan that might fill in that gap. So those are some of the feasible things that can be done, as well as simply, again, having the same problem here as in back at UVA as in Taiwan, and that is to make sure people really see this is an urgent matter that everyone has to take seriously and help and contribute to solutions for.
The next question, next two, we have two very good questions. One is if there is there any support for training, if there's no support for training in English, how about Japanese, Korean, or Russian? Absolutely good question. As we said before, one big part of our research in this paper that we have submitted for the Talent Circulation Alliance project is to also further understand what is the role of teaching English, learning English in terms of internationalization. For Taiwan, learning English is not about going to the United States eventually or going to an English-speaking country per se. What it really is to allow, if you can imagine being a, I see that in the attendee list, at least for those registered, many of you may speak Asian languages. If you do not use English to search online for information, for a Taiwanese person, the default would be you will search in traditional Chinese. What that would actually lead to is quite a high level of dubious facts, if you will, otherwise known as fake news, because you will have to just find out if that information comes from a reputable source. And in the last 2 years, with different election cycles, there have been a lot of allegations that there is up to 20% fake news during election campaigns in Chinese language in order to influence the election results in Taiwan. Of course, that alleged fake news source comes from China. And many different sources have been trying to prove how much fake news there is. But learning English allows someone, a Taiwanese student, for example, to learn about Russia, Korea, Japan in English if they didn't know Russian, Korean, or Japanese. And I think that's something that's quite important. So there's a part about internationalization that is trying to move away from the Chinese speaking world in terms of information, data, and trying to broaden. And to broaden that international perspective, it's quite important to learn English. However, Steve, you asked a question, and I think it's absolutely right. Taiwan has been putting enormous amount of energy into investing in programs for students to learn Vietnamese, to learn Bahasa, whatever it is that students want to learn. There are more and more resources ever for students to be able to learn it and go to those places to broaden their perspective and to find work opportunities. And so in that way, I think finding jobs in Japan, South Korea, and Russia are quite difficult for Taiwanese students. Japan and South Korea are like Taiwan, high-income economies with already their own demographic and high-income challenges. But many Southeast Asian countries have excellent opportunities. And so an exchange of Southeast Asian students to come here and for Taiwanese students to learn different Southeast Asian languages has been a new renewed focus. But many other languages absolutely would be very helpful. But English somehow captures the ability, for example, for Indonesian and Vietnamese students to come to Taiwan to learn engineering in, for example, Taiwan University of Science and Technology. On the next question, can UVA create, can you see, Harry?
Accelerated learning.
That's for you. An accelerated learning hub. This is something in Taiwan to create synergy for both Taiwan and UVA. It's a great question because we just have good news this week that we've been working on for the past few years on trying to find ways for UVA to work with the Taiwanese university that we are actually affiliated with.
Right. And so it looks like we're going to have, I hope, a general university to university MOU, but that basically is simply an umbrella for whatever particular programs and schools want to create. I'm not quite sure what you meant, Stephen, by hub for accelerated learning. Perhaps for Chinese, absolutely. This university, as several others do, have very good Chinese language instruction and good connections with UVA. My own experience is that probably the worst way to learn a language is the typical 3 hours a week in a classroom, even plus language lab. Immersion is the way to go. And so if that's what you mean by intensive learning, I could not agree more. And I think that will be a possibility for students to find the time and the money to do it. Will be an obstacle that we may have to help them with. One other point to make about why some of these programs around the world don't succeed where others do. They basically need to be, and intensive language is a good example of what might work. They have to be really integrated into the curriculum. As I said, one of the problems in designing these study abroad programs in Taiwan for international students is that it's basically who can teach what, who's willing to teach what. So it becomes a grab bag, a kind of a smorgasbord of courses. I've seen it in many other places as well where I've worked abroad. Oftentimes, students don't even know until a week or so, or 2 weeks before the deadline for application, what is going to be offered in a partner program. The best practice that we found, I was asked by former President Teresa Sullivan to do a study group on this, was our own School of Architecture's program in Venice, which is extraordinarily successful. Why? This is best practice. What do we learn from it? First of all, there are core faculty that are just regulars in it. Again, the buy-in from the bottom is so important, and that condition is met. Number two, what is offered is very regularly scheduled year after year. It's a critically important part of the School of Architecture's curriculum, and that is what might be called the Western canon in architecture. That may be criticized now, but it's still fundamentally important. Thirdly, of course, Venice is a very attractive place to study. We think Taipei would be too, but it's that combination. And then that produced word of mouth. Shirley's younger daughter began in the architecture school, and she can testify that from day one, your senior students were telling her, you've got to go to Venice. She decided not to continue in architecture, so she didn't, but that's the kind of program that we hope we can create in many spots around the world for UVA students.
And I think the last question, since it's now 10 minutes to 11, we'll take one. We're answering all of the questions, so that's very good. The last remaining one is an excellent way to wrap up, and it comes back to what Harry was saying. So is it just trying to make internationalization an appeal, or is there, does the Taiwan government encourage its population to improve their fluency in English as a matter of Taiwanese security? That's a very good question. In fact, this person who asked, who's anonymous, obviously knows quite a bit, because for many years, for the last 30 years, since Taiwan first become not the capital of free China anymore and stopped being represented in any international organizations which require statehood, therefore eliminating the possibility of one learning Russian and becoming a diplomat, for example, it has actually become more and more China-leaning in many ways. And this is something that in 2008 to 2016, under the last president, Ma Ying-jeou, actually, especially in socially, it became ever more important in terms of students going. It was I would say, the high point of cross-strait relations in those 8 years as Taiwan and China became more friendly. But soon after that, in 2016, when what is perceived to be more anti-China party in Taiwan, the Democratic Progressive Party, won in 2 landslides now, 2016 and 2020 again, China started to become very concerned, because of course, it has led to it's a government that is very focused in terms of reducing dependence on China, but of course has been, as I said, quite unsuccessful, because the economic gravity of Chinese market and opportunity is so huge. But in 2018, the Chinese government decided that it wanted to, of course, in some ways sanction the Taiwanese government, but try to give more opportunities for Taiwanese young professionals and students, and started to provide a lot of incentives. And this created a brain drain, or what is perceived to be brain drain of students. If you are not able to speak foreign languages, and especially English, you can imagine, and you would like to find opportunities because you can't find jobs in Taiwan, what has become natural after 8 years of warm relationship with China is that many students go to China to go to universities and eventually find jobs in China. And this was very, very concerning. And that's when the Taiwanese government started to focus much more on internationalization than ever before. This is not well understood internationally, but it's very clear if you're in Taiwan, that's when the government went into emergency mode. This brain drain issue has been looming over everybody. And so learning English or becoming more international is not just a matter of giving young people more opportunity, but it's a matter for some people of security. And I think the US government has also recognized this. So in fact, the State Department, of course, has also moved their programs in terms of learning Chinese from mainland China to Taiwan. And over the last 18 months, there has been a lot of change, so that if you, for those of you online who are learning Chinese and thinking about public service, joining the State Department, or being involved in such work, I think that there is a lot of change going on, so that the traditional route of the last 30 years of studying Chinese in a mainland Chinese university may be now quite different. And maybe Harry can add to that.
No, just sort of supplement to what Shirley had already said, that basically for many Chinese on Taiwan, many Taiwanese people, they basically see that kind of reaching out to the rest of the world is not just one track, but two possible tracks. We normally think that it would be reaching out to the so-called Western world, for which English would be the common language. Traditionally, that is what Taiwanese did, but as Shirley has said, for a variety of reasons, the obstacles to doing so and the chances for successful careers coming out of it seem to be far more constrained now than they were before. Meantime, across the Taiwan Strait is another, the Taiwanese would say, another different country that is huge, a huge market, huge population, common culture, common language, and yet to them that is kind of internationalization or globalization option number two. So basically that's the problem, that many Taiwanese would just say it's easier to pick that China option than to pick the Western option. And that's where those who want to see China integrate with all of the world and not just with the big China across the Taiwan Strait, that's the argument and the conversation they're going to have.
Well, thank you very much for all of you joining us today.
Absolutely.
And we enjoy all of the questions, and we are happy to say for the first time we have done a webinar where we answer all of the questions. So thanks again. And if any of you have other questions, please feel free to email us separately.
Yep.
We love to share with you the results of our research as we go into phase 2 and phase 3 of this project.
Mm-hmm. Bye.